Hello, this is Brett from Survivalcomms. Today we're going to discuss marine direction finding and radio navigation using fixed beacons or AM broadcast signals. We're going to focus on handheld DF receivers, which are an oddity today compared to their more conventional tabletop receivers. The strength of the handheld DF was in the size and the integration of a sighting compass in the device itself. This made it easy for someone that was operating a small vessel, or someone who was quickly needing to confirm a radio bearing while they were underway. In part one of the fundamentals of radio navigation, we discussed the use of a AM transistor radio to establish the direction of a radio station by finding a null with a loop stick antenna. Well, good news, loop stick antennas are inside both of these and the principles are exactly the same, so please check out that content. Now, these devices were not inexpensive in their heyday. A handheld DF was around $300 new, and in today's money, that's over $1,000. Even this Heathkit MR21 is a kit sold for $110 in 1965, and that's over $1,000 adjusted for inflation today. Now, a Marine Loran C receiver in 1980 would be $1,500 at the time, and adjusted for inflation, that's $6,000 in today's money. You know, for comparison, my first car in the early 1980s was $400. This is just a slight illustration from an economic standpoint alone of what a revolution consumer GPS was. And for the recreational mariner, this simplistic use of AM signals as a navigation aid was practical and cost effective. Typical reception range of these signals was less than 100 miles offshore at sea level. When one used a tabletop DF, it also provided a source of entertainment and news for the mariner as well as a navigational aid, so it was a win-win. Well, let's talk about this handheld marine direction finder, the Seaspot2 by Seafarer. This radio was made in England by Electronic Laboratories Limited in the early 1980s. It is an AM radio receiver with a beat frequency oscillator, 4 long-wave beacons, and the medium-wave AM broadcast band. Now, attached to the top is a sighting compass. The original compass was broken, so I've replaced it with a Ritchie compass to preserve the device's functionality as a direction finder. Now, looking at the control end, we can see the tuning dial and the tuning scale for the two bands the radio receives. This knob at the bottom left is the on, off, and gain control, and at the right is a band selector that controls not only band selection but receiver and nav functionality. The two clockwise nav positions turn on a small lamp that illuminates the display and compass and brings the beat frequency oscillator into the circuit. In the center, there is a small 3-pin connector, and this is a charging port and an earphone port. The original earphones for this direction finder look like earpieces for a stethoscope rather than the earbuds that we are used to. I lack said headset, charger, or connector plug, so the JST connector tied into this connector allows me to listen to the audio with a set of earbuds. Loosening these two screws at the front of the receiver allows this cover to come off and allows us to remove the receiver out the back. So once we've removed our screws, the front comes off, and you can see the hardware is captured. And then we can just remove our receiver out the back like that. Well, now that we've removed the cover, we can see what we're working with here. I have changed out the battery to a 9-volt transistor battery. Originally, this had a NiCad pack in it that used a stack of D150 NiCad coin cells, and that battery was completely unserviceable, and I just elected to go with a transistor battery. So I just added this connector to it, and I use a wire tie through here. The nibbling was done on this board here, and that's to allow clearance for removing this back and forth because I had to attach that compass to the top of the housing. You can see our radio boards here, and at the bottom we can see our loop stick antenna. Remember, loop sticks receive signals on the broadside and on the ends of the nulls. And you can see where I've tagged in that JST connector into the existing audio connector. Therefore, if I do ever manage to get a hold of one of the original earphone assemblies, I can just go ahead and unsolder that and remove this, and I just have two little holes punched in that foil in the front. Here's our tuning capacitor, and you can see our tuning capacitor has a gear drive on it, which gives it a fair degree of precision in tuning the radio. And the radio receiver is actually pretty decent performer for what it is.
All right, then we'll go back to common knowledge. Sure, people are working on it. I was going to think. I was going to say that. See, this is how you know I didn't read it. I was going to say that. What most people would say, so I went the other direction.
The average retirement age is up by about 3 years over the past 30.
Okay.
But 62 is still the most.
The second handheld direction finder we're going to look at is this Vecta. The Vecta was invented and produced by Vectrac in 1972. Later, they were produced by ACR Electronics, who is still a prominent manufacturer in the locator beacon and survival electronics industry. The Vecta takes a different approach than the Seaspot in its execution, which, although more utilitarian, actually has a lot of features that enhance its utility as a radio navigation tool. The compass is of excellent quality and fully illuminated with a switch on the grip. The only other control is the gain on-off control located on top that is large and easy to operate. At the rear of the Vecta, we also have a signal strength meter that is also illuminated, and this shows you the signal strength of the signal in comparison to the C-Spot, which only used the operator's hearing. There is an external speaker on the Vecta, and it has surprisingly loud audio, so one does not need a separate earphone or headset. One of the things that makes the Vecta unique is the way it is tuned. Instead of a variable capacitor or something of that nature, it uses plug-in tuned circuits that the manufacturer called modules. Let's remove this one, which is tuned for 325 kilohertz. And you just pull it straight off the front. You can see that they used a tube socket for the interface and a threaded lid container for the module housing. Opening up our module, we can see the components. It should have been a simple process for the manufacturer to select the components, assemble them, and tune this on a jig. The strength of this system is it's foolproof. There's no ambiguity in tuning. It's a plug-and-play process. In a 15-minute class, you could have someone who knew nothing about this equipment previously employ it effectively in bearing determination. Now, the limitation of this system is that the operator needs to know, or would have needed to know, what modules they would need in advance. If one wanted to have complete coverage as far as U.S. Marine beacons went, that would have required a tackle box of like 40 different modules to cover the utilized Marine beacon spectrum completely. If they wanted to be able to use aeronautical non-directional beacons redundantly, this would have further added to that inventory of modules. And there are also modules available for the AM broadcast band, and to cover that completely, 100 plus additional modules would be required. So it's pretty clear that pre-planning to support your voyage would have been important using this device. And to cover all the marine beacons shown in our chart in Florida would have required 9 modules. Now, in reviewing the patent documents of this device, one of the features the inventor was touting was the addition of a 1020 Hz audio filter that would block other audio signals outside of that filter's passband. The beacons used a 1020 Hz audio tone, and the hope was that implementing this filter would assist the operator through interference reduction. Now, when we turned the device on before, there obviously was no suppression of the LED light interference. It makes me wonder if this feature was deleted in production as well, because it would have inhibited identification of AM broadcast band signals as well. I do not have any AM broadcast band modules to test this theory, so we need to open our device up and inject a modulated 325 kilohertz signal. To open our device, we need to remove the battery cap and the nylon fasteners that hold the housing together. Now, one thing I failed to make mention of was that when I purchased this, it had a 9-volt power pack in there, used AA batteries, and that would have given it a better, milliamp hour capacity than just what I've got here, which is just a single transistor battery. Now, when I got this in the mail, it was completely corroded inside, and because the individual had never taken the batteries out of it. So now we've opened up our Vecta like a clamshell, and you can see all the components inside of it, and it's pretty doggone simple. Here is your gain control, your signal strength meter, your speaker, your loop stick antenna here, and of course your module's still plugged in the front. So we'll go ahead and apply power to it. Now I've been in this device before. I had to replace these two leads because the corrosion had went all the way back up this ground lead and had gotten into the circuit board. So I've already been in here before to repair that to make this device serviceable. Well, let's go ahead and inject a signal. I've had to turn the LED light off because with the LED light on, you can hear the LED light interference there. And then turning that off. So we've got a little loop hooked to our signal generator. Stick that there by the antenna. And let's go ahead and give ourselves a carrier. And that's it, minus 65.6 decibel milliwatts. Now let's go and apply 1020 hertz. Now let's go ahead and try 2 kilohertz. Yep, still got audio. Let's try 3 kilohertz. Let's try 500 hertz. And back to our carrier. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that the audio filtering portion of this design is not in the production models of this. Let's talk about the marine beacons that were in Florida in the same time frame these radios were used. We're going to do a tour of the beacons on some early 1990s nautical charts close to the end of their lives, and a few images of what they look like today. Well, let's start our beacon tour. First, we are looking at the regional overview chart, and the details of many of the radio beacons and lighthouses are visible here, as well as the aeronautical non-directional beacons that are close to shore. Additionally, there are details about a couple of AM broadcasters visible. We're going to start out in Mayport and work our way around the peninsula clockwise, talking about the stations that were on the air at the end of this era. Our first station is Station R like Romeo, which was located south of St. John's Point, and it operated on a frequency of 306 kilohertz. Range was listed at 125 miles. Next is Station Z like Zulu, which was located at Cape Canaveral and operated on a frequency of 313 kilohertz. Range was listed at 125 miles. Next is Station J like Juliet, which is north of the Jupiter Inlet and operated on a frequency of 294 kilohertz. Range was listed at 125 miles. Next is Station Q like Quebec, which was on the north side of the Hillsborough Inlet and operated on a frequency of 299 kilohertz. Range was listed as 25 miles. Next is Station U like Uniform, which was located on the southern tip of Virginia Key outside Miami. It operated on a frequency of 322 kilohertz. Range was listed at 100 miles. Next is Station OE like Oscar Echo, which was located on Loggerhead Key, which also is the oldest or was the oldest radio beacon location in Florida. Operating frequency was 286 kilohertz and the range was listed as 170 miles. Now moving up the west coast, we have Station H like Hotel, which was located outside of Tampa on Egmont Key. Operating frequency was listed as 310 kilohertz and range was 170 miles. Moving north, our next beacon was Station Y like Yankee, which was the last beacon to be commissioned in Florida. Operating frequency was listed as 290 kilohertz and the range was 150 miles. And we have Station W like Whiskey, which was located northwest of Cape San Blas at the lighthouse site. Frequency was 320 kilohertz and range was 125 miles. If you made it this far, thank you for watching, and I hope you found this content educational and entertaining. I do have an AM broadcast band module for the Vecta inbound to me, and we will check that out when it hits the door. I hope this helps. This is Brett from Survivalcomms. Until next time.